watching Bloomberg Quint Live. Over the last 3 days, we've been speaking to business and political leaders from across the world here at the World Economic Forum's annual summit. But I have with me a very special guest. Marty Baron, as you know, is the editor of the Washington Post and before that the Boston Globe. He was portrayed in a movie that was very popular in India as well, Spotlight, for the work that he and his team did in uncovering a sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Church in Boston. Mr. Baron, thank you very much for speaking with us here today. We live in very difficult times, especially as news people. Are these the worst, most polarizing times that you've seen in your several decade-long career?
There's no question. We in the United States live in a very polarized society, and it's becoming increasingly so. And that makes it difficult for those of us in the news business to cover events because I think we've become a tribal society, and people feel that they can't agree even on what the basic facts are. So they believe if the facts are it's good for me, then it must be true.
Yes.
And if it's not good for me, it must be false. So it makes it a very different environment because we try to deal with objective fact, and we're not flawless. We have our flaws. We're imperfect in many different ways, but we certainly try hard to get the facts.
You know, the question that confronts us all as news people is what are the facts? What is the truth, right? We deal with this every day, and it hasn't been that difficult so far, but when you look at the polarized nature of questioning, for instance, let me tell you, in India, over the last 2 years, we've been questioning a lot of our history in India and attempting to rewrite it. And that debate becomes less about fact and more about opinion then. How have you been able to navigate challenges of this nature?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, I believe there is such a thing as objective fact, and I think there's been an effort, not only in our country, but in other countries, to try to undermine the very idea of objective fact and objective truth. And it's not just that people are trying to disqualify journalists as arbiters of fact. They're trying to disqualify others, too. Trying to disqualify historians, trying to disqualify scientists, trying to disqualify law enforcement, trying to disqualify other entities independent of government as arbiters of objective fact. And I think that, in democracies, we have to agree on a baseline set of facts. We can disagree about how to solve the problems in society or what the primary issues are. We should have those kinds of debates. That's the purpose of a democracy. But we have to work from a baseline set of objective facts, and that's what our staff tries to do on a day-to-day basis. And we're not going to be distracted by political pressures from one side or the other.
Political pressures is one, ownership pressures are the other issue that we deal with back in India. I also want to talk to you about what it's like to be owned by a billionaire that is so viciously hated by the current president of the United States. I mean, how do you deal with the conflict and the issues that come about there?
Well, let's be clear, he's become a target because the president doesn't like the coverage from the Washington Post.
Right.
And that's the reason that he's been targeted. But look, we just have our job to do. We try to stick to our job. The president has said that he's at war with the media, but we don't see ourselves at war with him. I always like to say we're not at war, we're at work. And we're going to focus on our work and not be distracted by his attacks on us or his attacks on our owner or his attacks on or whatever political points he wishes to score. We're just going to be focused on our work. And that's, I think, the important part is that, look, we just can't be distracted.
There was a lot of criticism in the way the U.S. media handled the presidential elections and the issues they covered and the platform they eventually willy-nilly gave to Donald Trump that helped him become President Trump. What were the lessons that you would say the U.S. media should have learned from that electoral process? Because I think that the same might very easily apply to what India is going to witness in the next few months.
Right. Well, I would disagree with the premise. I don't think that we willy-nilly gave him a platform, and I don't think that anybody can characterize the media as being all the same. The media is, it's like saying all lawyers, all politicians, all scientists. There are a lot of different segments of the media. I think that certainly certain networks, I think, gave a huge platform to Donald Trump, where he could hold his rallies and make statements that were not true, and they wouldn't be contested, and he would have free airtime. It was basically free advertising. To me, that's not journalism. But that's not what we at the Washington Post did. We did huge background work on Donald Trump, his entire life, his career. We even did an entire biography of him. We had 20 journalists working on that biography to get it done in time for the election. It came out in August before the election. So, we've been working on that. And so I think that the lesson from that election was that we as journalists, well before Donald Trump became a candidate, we should have detected what was happening in our society that would lead to a candidate like Donald Trump. So we need to do a better job of listening and getting around the country, getting out of the major metropolitan areas and listening to what people have to say and understanding what they're saying. There's too much talking in journalism. There should be more listening. And so we as journalists, I think, need to be better listeners and to be more generous listeners.
I didn't mean to broad brush all media, but when you read what, media professors and academics like Jay Rosen have been writing about the ability of media to focus on the right issues versus allowing for the noise to dominate, this was the question I wanted to put, saying, for instance, the fake news problem or the ability to verify information or fact check. At a time when newsrooms are becoming less equipped with resources, the world gets more crowded with a lot more digital media, to be able to prioritize all of these issues, to allow the noise or to ensure that the noise does not overpower the editorial efforts or agenda, these are difficult challenges and conflicts. And I was wondering if you could talk us through how you have in the last 2 or 3 years worked through some of these at the Washington Post.
Well, everything we do is a difficult challenge. That's just the situation that we work under in the press. Look, at the Washington Post, we have an entire team that does fact-checking. We have 3 individuals who are working on that. They do that full-time. They fact-check every statement that the president makes. We have documented every false and misleading statement that the president has made, and we've documented false and misleading statements by other politicians and other individuals as well. So, in the first 2 years of this administration in the United States, the president has made 8,158 false and misleading statements. He was making them at a rate of over 60 a day in the last year, and about 15 a day prior to that. And so we have documented all of that, and we have them in a database. That's very rigorous work. It's hard work. It has to be done every single day. And these misstatements tend to accelerate right before an election. They did during the midterm elections in the United States, right before the midterm elections. So, we take our job seriously about fact-checking the president and fact-checking other politicians and fact-checking other people who are in the news and who are having influence on events in our country and around the world.
How much of a setback has it been to the freedom of the press when so many political leaders are so critical of the press or what it stands for, whether it's President Trump or even in India, Prime Minister Modi is dismissive of the press almost. He's never held a press conference in his 4.5 years now. He does very select interviews, and many of them, are alleged pre-prepared interviews, so to speak. Mm-hmm. What has that meant for the freedom of the press over the last 5-8 years?
Well, look, it's not unusual for politicians to attack the press. They've been doing that since time immemorial. Of course, it's accelerated in recent years. Politicians see that they can gain political advantage by attacking the press. It always helps to have an enemy. Certainly, Donald Trump seems to perform best when he can identify an enemy, and when he doesn't have somebody else, he's always got the press that he can identify as the enemy. And so, I think that this is something that we just have to live with. I think it's highly corrosive, of course. I think that it undermines confidence in not just the press, but in objective fact. And people, as I said before, we as a society and a democracy, we have to agree on a baseline set of facts. We can debate and should debate what are the solutions to the problems, what are the right policies, things like that. But we have to agree on a baseline set of facts. We just, they want to be in a war with us. I don't want to be in a war with them. I want us just to focus on our jobs and continue to do it. And the great thing is that actually in the United States, over the last couple of years, since Donald Trump has been in office, trust in the press has actually gone up. It's actually gone up, and it's gone up quite a bit, particularly within the last year. And the reason is because of the stories that we're doing, the ones that were originally questioned by the President of the United States, they're being validated. These stories are turning out to be true. Of course, we knew they were true at the beginning, but now people can see that they were true. And they can also see that some of these statements that were made by the President are turning out to be false. And so people are now making judgments about who to believe. And so while trust levels are not what we would like them to be, they are increasing. Now, the problem is that trust in the media has highly polarized itself. So among Democrats, trust in the media has accelerated, has really gone up a lot. It has gone up only a little bit among Republicans, and it's gone up moderately among independents. But overall, the trust levels have gone up. So we don't like to see that level of polarization, but that's just something that I think over the long term we're going to have to work on, and I have confidence that our reporting will be validated over the long run, and so I would expect that trust levels will continue to rise.
Mr. Barron, media is supposed to be objective and non-partisan, and yet I think we've seen in India more recently and probably for a longer period of time in the US, aligned media aligned with certain ideologies, with certain political parties. Is that a bad thing if you're able to disclose up front that you're aligned with a certain ideology or a certain political party, or do you think that, that's acceptable?
There are different kinds of media. Different people have different approaches. Certainly with the media in the United States, there have always been political alliances among media, going back to sort of the origins of the country. It was only in about the 50s and the 60s that we really embraced the idea of objective journalism. So there can be some media who are aligned with political parties. There can be others who want to maintain their independence. That's our position, is to be completely independent of any partisan institution. And at any one time, we may offend people on the left or people on the right or whatever it might be. That's not something that we take into consideration. So there are many different types of media. I think it's important to think back as to what objectivity in the media means. It doesn't mean that every side just gets 50%, that it's 50%, okay? That it doesn't matter what if you've done all your work, if you've done all your reporting, if you've done your research, you've been thorough, you've been fair, and you've come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter what your reporting shows, you should still give 50% to this side and 50% to that side. The notion of objective reporting, as originally conceived about 100 years ago, actually, in the United States, was that you would set aside your own preconceptions, that you would set aside set aside your own preconceptions, and that you would, in a fair, open-minded way, would take a look at the facts. But once you arrived at the facts, then you would report what those facts were, regardless of the political pressures that you were under. And one thing that we were always encouraged to avoid is propaganda coming from the government and propaganda coming from other powerful interests.
Okay, one final question then, and this is nothing to do with ownership or politics, but it has to do with what technology is doing to newsrooms across the world. Both good and bad. We're seeing a series of layoffs across the US. We're going to witness that in India soon as well. But equally, it's been able to equip us as journalists with better tools to be able to tell stories faster. I'm not sure that's always good, but to tell stories faster in different media formats. What, in your assessment over the last few years of seeing newsrooms go digital, have been the key challenges and the key opportunities?
Well, the challenges are, as you alluded to, that we're working 24 hours a day.
Yes.
The competition to get news out first is intense, so we have to move very quickly. We also face the challenge of a lot of false information being spread throughout the internet, and we're having to deal with that as well. And that tends to be a challenge. It tends to be a challenge for us. The advantage to us is that we can disseminate our work to far more people than we were ever able to do before. We can tell stories in new ways. We can use a whole variety of new tools to tell stories that can be highly effective. So now we use video for what used to be just a newspaper for us. We use video, we use audio, we use information graphics, we use interactive graphics, we use animation, we use augmented reality. We use all of these different tools to help explain complex subjects and to make them highly engaging. And so that's a huge advantage for us. And we can interact with our users and our readers and the public in a way that we were never able to do before. So they can actually contribute to our journalism. They can inform us. They can share their ideas. We can explain ourselves to them as best we can. And so that, I think, is an advantage as well.
Marty Barron, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your time here.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.